Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into the dense, humid jungles of Mesoamerica, where the buzzing of cicadas is so loud it feels like someone left the volume knob turned all the way up, and where the stars press down on you so brightly that you almost feel small enough to get lost between them. You are standing in the middle of a vast stone plaza, with temples rising like enormous stairways toward the heavens. And you realize that these were not just piles of rock stacked for dramatic effect. They were designed to measure the sky, to capture the rhythms of the sun, the moon, and even Venus itself. The Mayan timekeepers, often overlooked in school textbooks, were essentially human calculators who turned the universe into a calendar that still startles scientists today. And yet, despite their genius, you probably won't survive trying to use their almanacs to plan your dentist appointments. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I am always curious about where and when you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward your sandals, scraping against limestone polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. And you can almost hear the chants of priests who once stood in this very plaza, their eyes fixed on the sky instead of the crowd. The Mayans believed that time was not just a backdrop, was alive, breathing, something you had to respect or risk being swallowed whole. The sound of drums would have echoed off these walls, but behind the rituals was cold, careful mathematics, as intricate as anything your smartphone calendar app pretends to be. Everywhere you look, the walls are covered in glyphs that seem like art at first, but you begin to realize they are numbers, names of days, markers of cycles so long that they make you question your own little rush to check emails before bed. Mainstream history tells you that Mayans tracked not only the solar year, but also a 260-day sacred calendar that overlapped like gears, producing combinations that dictated everything from the best day to plant corn to whether you should probably avoid going outside because fate was not in your favor. Historians still argue whether the 260 days were tied to agricultural cycles, human gestation, or something stranger. But you can feel the weight of that uncertainty pressing against your shoulders as you walk beneath the carved arches. Somewhere in the plaza, a stone stela rises, tall and narrow like an ancient billboard, only instead of advertising burgers or shampoo, it records entire epochs. You reach out to touch the cool surface and feel the carved grooves of numbers stacked like Lego blocks, each symbol part of what's known as the long count calendar. This was the Mayans' way of measuring time not just for a harvest or a king's reign, but for thousands upon thousands of years stretching into the past and the future. Imagine if your wall calendar went from dentist appointment at 3 o'clock to cosmic reset scheduled in 4,000 years. Talk about over-planning. A quirky detail slips into your mind. Mayans had no metal tools, no beasts of burden, no wheels rolling across highways. Yet they plotted astronomical events with a precision that would make Renaissance scientists blush. In fact, one of their tables predicting the movements of Venus is so accurate that it only misses the planet's actual cycle by a fraction of a day over centuries. You can't even microwave popcorn without burning half the bag. But they were timing Venus. Historians still argue whether this level of precision came from centuries of careful naked eye observation or if there were methods of calculation we simply haven't rediscovered. As the night deepens, you notice how the temples seem to point directly toward the stars, and you imagine priests climbing those stairs at dawn, waiting for that moment when the sun's edge would align perfectly with the stone. Corners like the universe was shaking hands with human construction. You feel a breeze shift against your skin, carrying the smell of damp earth and crushed leaves. And you think about how the Mayans must have seen every shift in nature, every rustle of wind, every bird call is connected to these larger cycles of time. You walk toward one of the smaller shrines and peek inside. The walls are painted with fading reds and blues, and you imagine the glow of torchlight flickering across a priest's face as he recites dates not yet born, warning that one day kings will fall, drought will come, and wars will rip across the jungle. For them, time was not just counting days. It was prophecy. And here you are, centuries later, standing in the ruins of their foresight, realizing they weren't wrong about cycles of collapse. You glance at your watch, suddenly embarrassed by its blinking digits, which seem crude compared to the cosmic sweep of numbers etched into stone. The sound of a distant bird breaks the silence, sharp and metallic, like someone striking flint. You think of how the Mayans listened to these same calls and folded them into their understanding of omens. If a bird sang on a certain day of the sacred count, that sound could ripple into decisions about planting or war. Imagine canceling a job interview because a parrot squawked on Tuesday. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were layered on top of genuine astronomical insights or whether, in their worldview, there was no separation at all. You let your hand rest on another wall, tracing the carved spiral that symbolizes cycles within cycles, and it dawns on you that the Mayans didn't see time as a straight road with a starting line and a finish line. They saw it as a looping river, always bending back on itself, where your present is also your past, and your future has already whispered its first syllables. It's unsettling, but also oddly comforting, like being told that even if you trip today, you'll get another chance when the wheel spins back around. As you move deeper into the ruins, the jungle presses closer. Vines crawling over blocks of stone like veins reclaiming a skeleton. The smell of wet leaves and distant smoke fills your nose. And you think about how these places were once alive with people who took time so seriously that entire cities rose and fell according to its rhythm. Somewhere between the howler monkeys and the moss, you sense their overlooked brilliance, the way they made calendars, not as tools for office meetings, but as bridges between human life and the heartbeat of the cosmos. You pause at the edge of the plaza, looking back at the temple stairs glowing faintly in the moonlight, and you realize that tonight, under the same sky they studied, you are part of the same ticking clock, whether you understand it or not. You step onto the stone stairways, feeling each carved riser under your fingertips, and notice that they aren't random steps, they are deliberate markers, a tactile map of time itself. Each stone has a story, a number, a symbol, and you almost want to whisper to it, asking how it remembers centuries of sunrises and human bustle. The air is thick and sweet with the scent of flowering trees, and the distant croak of frogs creates a rhythm that seems to sync with your heartbeat. You realize that Mayan architects weren't merely building monuments, they were crafting physical calendars. Monumental timepieces that could be read like a sacred diary of the cosmos. Historians still argue whether every single step, every carved corner, was designed with such precise numerical intention, or whether some of it is the cumulative magic of generations adding and refining. As you climb higher, you start to notice the subtle details. A jaguar glyph etched into a corner. A sun symbol hiding near the base of a balustrade, tiny dots and lines that would have been invisible to anyone not trained in the Mayan calendar system. It's astonishing to think that each of these markings could encode a year, a day, or even the alignment of distant planets, and yet here you are centuries later, marveling at something you probably wouldn't notice in a quick tourist snapshot. You imagine the laborers lifting heavy limestone blocks with nothing but ropes, wooden levers, and sheer muscle, all the while knowing that their work would outlast their lifetimes. And yes, you think fleetingly about how you can barely lift your groceries from the car without complaining, which makes you feel both lazy and slightly guilty. Near the top, a carved stela stands like a sentinel, and you lean in to examine the symbols. Each notch and curve communicates information far beyond a mere number. Dates, events, rulers, reigns, and cosmic observations intertwine in a dense tapestry of meaning. One small panel depicts what looks like a series of dots and bars, which is actually a vigesimal base 20 number system, Clever enough to make you wonder why modern humans settled for base 10 when this seems so poetic. A quirky detail emerges as you squint. Some of the dots appear to be slightly worn, as if someone centuries ago was absent-mindedly counting them with their finger, turning a rigid calendar into a personal interaction with time. Historians still argue whether these marks were purely ceremonial, used in teaching young scribes, or if they had a practical function in everyday life. You trace your finger along a carved jaguar paw, remembering that jaguars were considered guardians of both night and the underworld, and realize how intertwined myth and measurement were. For the Mayans, counting days was never divorced from storytelling. Each number held layers of meaning, symbolism, and narrative weight. The stairways themselves, when sunlight hits them at specific angles, cast shadows that double as clocks, shifting with the seasons. You squint at one particularly sharp shadow and feel a shiver of recognition. This is not just stone, it is a living instrument, performing celestial music with light and shadow. Your gaze drifts toward the surrounding landscape, where smaller structures huddle around the main temple like apprentices to a master. You notice altars aligned perfectly with the cardinal points. And the way the stairways climb suggests not only a temporal hierarchy, but also a ritualized journey. Ascending the steps is a metaphor for moving through time itself. You imagine a novice priest climbing these same stairs at dawn, reciting sequences of dates and celestial events. Beads of sweat tracing their way down weathered skin, feeling the weight of knowing that every step echoes thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. And somewhere in your mind, you smirk at the thought that modern humans can't even manage an alarm clock without swearing. A gentle wind ruffles your hair and carries the subtle scent of smoke from ceremonial fires long extinguished. You crouch to examine a glyph that appears almost like a grid, only to realize it's a lunar table, marking the moon's phases across a cycle of years. Farmers, priests, and rulers alike would have consulted these tables, coordinating planting, festivals, and political events in a way that seems simultaneously mystical and astonishingly practical. Some fringe researchers suggest that hidden within these patterns were predictions of eclipses, meteor showers, and even obscure planetary alignments, though historians still argue whether such predictions were consistently accurate or more symbolic, designed to impress and maintain social cohesion. You continue upward, letting your hands brush over smooth limestone that has absorbed centuries of sunlight, rain, and human touch. Tiny insects crawl over cracks in the stone, indifferent to your presence, yet somehow part of the rhythm that these stairways were built to mark. You think about how every riser corresponds to a temporal unit, days, months, cycles, in that climbing these steps is almost like walking through history itself, where each movement is measured and meaningful. You notice a tiny carved face peeking out from one side, wryly grinning, as if mocking your slow pace. And you laugh softly, realizing that even the Mayans had a sense of humor etched into stone. At the summit, you pause to take in the vista. The jungle stretches endlessly, treetops undulating like waves, punctuated by smaller pyramids and ceremonial platforms. You feel a sense of vertigo, not from height, but from the realization that human ingenuity here has been quietly remarkable for centuries. The stairways are more than stone. They are narratives of power, science, and artistry fused into architecture. They are proof that counting days, months, and celestial events can be elevated to a form of art. A legacy so subtle that it requires patience, curiosity, and a willingness to see numbers as living things. You rest your palm against the final step, imagining how many pilgrims, priests, and curious visitors like yourself have paused here, looking outward, feeling the dual weight of the earth and the sky. Shadows shift across the plaza below, aligning perfectly with the bases of other structures. And you realize that every angle, every carved glyph, every step is a testament to the Mayans' obsession with time, just as a concept, but as a force that governs life, harvests, and memory. In this moment, climbing the stairway is no longer about reaching the top. It's It's about recognizing the rhythm of a culture that measured existence with precision, poetry, and just a hint of cheeky audacity. You step back carefully, savoring the sensation of stone beneath your feet, and let your mind drift toward the smaller details you might have missed. Tiny carvings of hummingbirds and cornstalks. The occasional smudge of red pigment, the subtle undulations of the stone that catch sunlight at certain hours. These stairways are not simply monuments, they are living calendars, instruments of time and silent teachers, whispering lessons about patience, observation, and the intricate dance between humans and the cosmos. As you descend slowly, savoring every tactile groove and shadowed curve, you feel a quiet respect for the architects who transformed stone into story, stone into numbers, and stone into a heartbeat that echoes through the centuries. The long count calendar waits for you like a slow river stretching back into deep prehistory. And as you step closer, you can almost hear its gentle current whispering numbers older than any living memory. Unlike the 365-day solar calendar or the 260-day sacred Tzolk'in, the long count was designed to track time across millennia, measuring periods of thousands of years with a precision that seems absurdly ambitious for a civilization without clocks or telescopes. You notice the glyphs stacked neatly like dominoes, each block representing a day, each column a larger unitkin, wino, ton, keaton, and bactonant. You're struck by the sheer audacity of it. Historians still argue whether the long count was ever intended as a practical tool for daily use or primarily as a cosmic record, a timeline of mythical and historical events. You run your fingers over the carved stone, tracing the familiar bars and dots, each one counting a day with an almost meditative patience. It occurs to you that this system could measure a stretch of time so vast that it would swallow human lifespans whole. Yet the Mayans approached it as naturally as you check your phone for the date. There's something both comforting and disorienting in realizing that while you stress over a single week, they were calculating time in cycles that spanned 125 years per backtone, turning human existence into a mere ripple within a grand cosmic rhythm. Somewhere in the corner of the plaza, a worn stela depicts mythic rulers seated before glyphs, and you realize the long count also functioned as political memory. Kings and queens, their reigns meticulously marked, were woven into the fabric of eternity. The idea was that rulers were not merely mortal, but participants in cycles that extended beyond their lifetimes, aligning with celestial events to legitimize authority. A quirky detail surfaces in your imagination. Some scholars suggest that the long count was occasionally restarted after disruptions, like a cosmic reset button, so that society could recalibrate without losing its mythic sense of continuity. Historians still argue whether these restarts were symbolic, calendrical errors, or evidence of political propaganda disguised as timekeeping. As you circle the stela, you notice smaller inscriptions tucked into corners, seemingly insignificant. Yet they encode supplementary data, astronomical observations, ritual events, and even drought records. The long count was not only a tool to count the distant past, but also a living ledger, capturing the pulses of nature, society, and celestial mechanics simultaneously. You feel the weight of centuries pressing against your shoulders, imagining scribes laboring under flickering torchlight, recording every day with precise attention, while birds swoop through open plazas above them. You chuckle at the thought that these scribes probably had better penmanship than you do after 3 cups of coffee and a rushed email. Looking upward, you catch a glimpse of the sun slicing across the temple edge, casting a golden line that seems to pierce the long count glyphs. You imagine the priests aligning their rituals to this cosmic choreography, ensuring that every ceremony echoed the movements of the heavens. Some fringe theories suggest that the long count may have even anticipated astronomical phenomena such as eclipses or planetary subnon, more planetary solstice conjunctions, though historians still argue whether such predictions were consistently reliable or merely symbolic flourishes meant to awe and intimidate onlookers. The more you examine, the more you realize that this calendar was less about telling time, in the mundane sense, and more about weaving human life into the larger tapestry of cosmic events. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of moss and the faint trace of incense from distant altars. You crouch to inspect a section of glyphs partially worn by centuries of rain and sun. These symbols mark Bactans and Kayatans, the enormous cycles of the long count. And for a fleeting moment, you imagine living inside one of these vast intervals. Seeing your own life as a flicker within a much larger pulse, you shiver slightly at the scale. 5,000 years can feel incomprehensible. There's also a strange solace in knowing that human dramas, fears, and joys were already recorded in stone long before your first alarm clock went off. You step back and notice something playful, a small glyph that seems to depict a little smiling face, hidden among otherwise solemn numbers. You imagine a scribe inserting a personal flourish, a tiny wink across centuries, almost like the Mayans' version of leaving an Easter egg. The combination of precision and whimsy makes the calendar feel alive, as though it were more than mere numbers. It is storytelling, mathematics, and art intertwined. Historians still argue whether these small, personal touches were accidental, intentional jokes, or spiritual signatures meant to invite future observers into a quiet dialogue. The more you study the long count, the more you understand how the Mayans approached temporality as cyclical and expansive. They saw history as patterns repeating in spirals, where events resonate across generations, and where endings are also beginnings. You notice parallels between these cycles and the seasonal changes surrounding the Plaza. The way shadows lengthen and shorten, the slow growth of vines over stone, the relentless rhythm of tides and moons. In this context, the long count isn't merely a calendar. It's a philosophy, a way of embedding human existence within the vast, repeating pulse of the universe. You wander closer to a corner where the sun casts a final golden stripe across the glyphs, and you try to imagine the priests of old chanting numerical sequences, aloud, their voices echoing off stone, mixing with the hum of insects and distant animal calls. Every utterance, every stroke of a stylus seems designed to tether human time to cosmic time, bridging the ephemeral with the eternal. You laugh softly, thinking that your digital calendar can barely remind you to drink water, yet these ancient systems tracked centuries with far greater fidelity. Your gaze drifts to the base of the stela, where faded glyphs mark the mythical start date of the long count, August 11th, 3114 BCE. In the Gregorian calendar, you stare at the number as if it could speak to you, whispering stories of creation, human ambition, and celestial order. A fringe idea lingers in your mind. Some researchers suggest that this date aligns with particular cosmic cycles, meaning that the calendar was not arbitrary, but a deliberate attempt to harmonize earthly events with planetary rhythms. Historians still argue whether these alignments were intentional, coincidental, or merely a reflection of the Mayans' sophisticated observational skill. As shadows lengthen and the jungle hum swells into night, you feel the gravity of all this time, literally and metaphorically. The long count, in its patient, meticulous design, reminds you that even civilizations without modern technology can perceive and quantify vast scales, leaving behind legacies that challenge contemporary understanding. The calendar embodies both the human desire to measure the universe and the recognition that we are mere participants within its larger dance. You take a slow breath, inhaling the earthy aroma and imagining how countless generations have paused in this very spot, contemplating the infinite measuring moments that extend far beyond their lifetimes, leaving you to do the same in quiet reverence. You find yourself leaning against the cool limestone of a temple platform, looking up at the open sky, where Venus hovers like a brilliant eye, watching over the jungle, and suddenly you realize that the Mayan astronomers were not merely stargazers, they were obsessive cartographers of the heavens, charting every wobble, every rise and fall of the planets. You imagine them on the rooftops, night after night, eyes trained on the shifting light, quills scratching calculations onto bark paper codices that would, if they survived, astound modern scientists. Historians still argue whether their methods involved purely naked eye observation or a more sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics that we have yet to fully decode. A soft wind ruffles your hair carrying the scent of damp earth, and you picture these sky watchers balancing on narrow terraces, their bodies swaying slightly as they align sticks and stones to track the trajectory of Venus, known to them as the morning star, or evening star, depending on its phase. You shiver at the thought, thinking about how easy it would have been to topple off a roof while trying to calculate a planet's position. And you smile at the absurdity your own clumsy attempts to set up a tripod for stargazing feel tame in comparison. Yet despite the physical risk, the Mayans' precision was astonishing. They predicted the cycle of Venus with such accuracy that modern astronomers can verify the correlation to within a couple of hours over decades. Somewhere nearby, a series of glyphs painted on a stucco wall capture Venus's appearances and disappearances, intertwined with warnings and rituals. You imagine priests chanting in low, resonant tones, marking the planet's morning appearances as days for war or significant events, while its evening sightings indicated periods for peace or ceremony. A quirky detail floats into your mind. Some codices even suggest that the Mayans believed Venus could influence human temperament, inspiring courage in warriors or inducing lethargy in commoners. Historians still argue whether these planetary attributions were taken literally or if they functioned more as symbolic frameworks to synchronize society and ritual. You wander toward a small observation platform, imagining the quiet tension as priests waited for the exact moment Venus rose above the horizon. The air would have been heavy with incense, the hum of insects blending with the murmured prayers. And the first light of dawn would hit the stones in patterns that only the initiated could read. You lean against the balustrade, feeling the rough surface beneath your fingers, and consider how this practice ties back to their concept of cyclical time. The planet's predictable dance mirrored the endless loops of years and backtons, providing both guidance and reassurance. A faint, almost imperceptible scratch on one of the glyphs catches your attention. You crouch to examine it more closely and realize it might have been a mnemonic mark for an apprentice. A quick reminder of Venus's synodic cycle of 584 days. It's the tiniest human touch in an otherwise cosmic record, and it makes you smile at the thought that, despite their reverence for grand cycles, the Mayans also left subtle fingerprints of their everyday labor. Historians still argue whether such marks were common teaching tools, casual doodles, or deliberate secret codes for those in the know. As you stand and tilt your head skyward, you can almost feel the meticulous rhythm of observation. The same pattern repeated nightly, with notes recorded, predictions refined, and rituals prepared. You imagine the communal tension as a leader announces that Venus will rise in a particular quadrant, signaling the start of war, a festival, or planting season. The planet becomes a silent director of human behavior, a cosmic referee, and a timekeeper of astonishing influence. You laugh softly, imagining modern governments basing policy on the appearance of a bright speck in the sky and thinking about how silly or perhaps profound that might seem. You wander down a stairway lined with faded murals, tracing the images of priests with telescopic devices that were really simple sighting tools: sticks, stones, and their own careful eyes. You wonder how they kept such meticulous records without ink that survives as long as the stone beneath your feet. A quirky thought strikes you. Some researchers suggest that priests may have recorded astronomical events using a form of oral transmission, combining it with temporary markings in sand or ash, effectively creating a live, mutable database long before paper codices were widely used. Historians still argue whether these oral methods were accurate enough to complement written records, or if they were more ceremonial than functional. Moving to the edge of the temple, you notice that Venus's cycles were not studied in isolation. Other planets, eclipses, and lunar phases were tracked in concert, producing an interwoven calendar of astronomical events. You pause to imagine priests comparing data, correcting calculations, and debating discrepancies. Their world both chaotic and highly ordered. A tiny bird chirps nearby, startling you, and you can help but think about how even the smallest natural sounds were once integrated into a system that connected human, earthly, and cosmic rhythms. You sit on a warm stone ledge, feeling the faint vibration of the jungle as the night hums around you, and reflect on the remarkable precision of these skywatchers. Their work wasn't just scientific, it was political, spiritual, and practical. Leaders relied on accurate celestial predictions to legitimize rule, schedule ceremonies, and maintain social cohesion, while ordinary citizens followed the planetary guidance for planting, trade, and personal decisions. Historians still argue whether this level of astronomical sophistication was widespread or concentrated among a small elite of priest astronomers, but either way, the results are impressive enough to make modern stargazers nod in respect. A soft breeze carries a hint of smoke from distant ceremonial fires mingling with the heavy scent of wet foliage, and you can almost hear the echo of chants counting days and cycles as priests record Venus' movements. You notice a small alcove where faded glyphs indicate particularly ominous appearances of the planet, perhaps signaling conflict or bad harvests. The thought makes you smile. Your local news might feel eerily similar, only updated every morning rather than every 584 days. Fringe scholars even speculate that certain glyphs could encode observations of Venus during rare retrograde motion, a subtlety that, if true, would suggest an astronomical sophistication comparable to some classical civilizations. Historians still argue whether these observations were precise or idealized for ritual purposes. As dawn approaches, the first light stretches across the temple steps, illuminating the glyphs and casting shadows that align with the planetary markers. You breathe slowly, feeling the cool stone beneath you, and consider how this entire practice required patience, observation, and a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. Even without telescopes, satellites, or modern software, the Mayans built a system that could predict the dance of Venus centuries into the future. You chuckle quietly at the irony. Humans with smartphones can barely track appointments. Yet these ancient skywatchers mastered planetary cycles with nothing more than their eyes, ingenuity, and devotion. You stand at the edge of the platform, letting your gaze wander across the jungle canopy as the first birds greet the sun, and realize that the Mayans' attention to Venus was not just an academic exercise, was a daily interaction with the cosmos, a way to synchronize human life with the celestial, to find guidance, rhythm, and even amusement in the predictable yet mysterious patterns overhead. Every calculation, every observation, every glyph carved in stone is a testament to a civilization that could read the sky like a book, and you feel privileged to step into their world, if only briefly, marveling at the elegant choreography of planet, priest, and jungle. You squint as the morning light stretches across the pyramid's face, and for a moment you can see why the Mayans turned their architecture into solar instruments, not just monuments. The temples themselves are more than stones, they are shadow play machines, casting slivers of light that mark solstices, equinoxes, and seasonal milestones with almost surgical precision. You lean closer, imagining the priest's delight at observing sunlight slice perfectly through niches and corners, a celestial timer that required no gears, batteries, or Wi-Fi. Historians still argue whether every shadow alignment was intentional, or if some were serendipitous quirks that later gained ritual significance, but the patterns are undeniable enough to make modern architects gape. You walk slowly along a terrace, feeling the limestone warm beneath your fingers. The play of light on stone is hypnotic, shifting subtly as the day progresses, each change registering time with elegant simplicity. You think about how modern humans fumble with digital clocks and smartwatches, yet here was a culture that embedded astronomical awareness into every corner of its living spaces. The sun, in its relentless arc, becomes a giant metronome, turning architecture into an instrument of observation. A quirky thought flits through your mind. Imagine trying to schedule a Zoom call by aligning your desk to the sun's shadow on a pyramid staircase. Somehow, it feels both absurd and strangely poetic. You notice a long staircase where the rising sun casts a sharp line across each riser at the equinox, perfectly bisecting a carved glyph. You crouch to trace the pattern, your fingers brushing over centuries-old grooves, and realize that the Mayans used these alignments to coordinate planting, harvests, and festivals. The solar calendar was a living tool, woven into daily existence, as reliable as your modern weather app but infinitely more elegant. Historians still argue whether the precision of these alignments was intended for practical agricultural guidance or primarily for ritual spectacle. Okay, though, both possibilities carry weight in your mind. From the top of the terrace, the jungle stretches endlessly, its canopy trembling with the movements of unseen creatures. You hear the faint hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves, and for a moment, you imagine the priests climbing these same stairs centuries ago, holding ceremonial instruments and sacred bundles, eyes fixed on the sunlight, calculating its dance with a devotion bordering on obsession. The alignment of sun and stone turns each day into a performance, a reminder that the cosmos and human life are inexorably linked. A subtle detail catches your attention. At the base of one staircase, small carved holes trace a pattern corresponding to the sun's path across the year. These tiny depressions were likely used as observational markers, casting miniature shadows that could be measured to anticipate solstices and equinoxes. You smile at the ingenuity, realizing that the Mayans essentially created a portable sundial in stone, and you feel a pang of envy for their patience and insight. Fringe scholars suggest that these markers might have also helped predict eclipses or other celestial phenomena, though historians still argue about the exact function and sophistication of such systems. As you continue along the temple's terraces, the scent of wet stone and jungle flowers mingles in the air. You pause at a corner where the sunlight touches a glyph depicting a jaguar and a maize stalk, symbols of the underworld and fertility, respectively. The way the sun illuminates this particular glyph on specific days suggests a deliberate ritual design, a blend of astronomical observation and mythological storytelling. You laugh quietly to yourself, imagining the priest whispering to a trainee, "See, the jaguar approves of today's planting," as if the feline deity were checking the calendar personally. Historians still argue whether these symbolic interactions were meant literally, spiritually, or pedagogically, but their combination of myth and measurement is undeniably clever. You crouch to trace the shadow of a small niche carved into the temple wall, where sunlight falls precisely at noon during the solstice. You imagine priests noting the moment, their hands raised in ritual acknowledgement, perhaps chanting sequences of dates and events to harmonize human life with the solar rhythm. The shadows and light become a kind of physical notation, a record of time that requires neither ink nor codex, but instead the patient observation of stone and sun. You shake your head in mild disbelief, thinking about your own reliance on apps that crash and updates that fail, and feel grateful for this ancient, silent, and perfectly reliable timekeeping system. From your vantage point, you spot a small altar where offerings were likely made to honor the sun god. A faint hint of incense smoke seems to drift through the air, and you imagine the ceremonial complexity. Dancers, musicians, priests chanting numerals, all timed to the sun's shadow, hitting a specific mark on the pyramid. You think about the human energy invested in synchronizing life with cosmic patterns, and it strikes you how far removed most modern humans are from such direct, tangible interaction with celestial mechanics. A quirky comparison pops into your mind. It's as if your digital calendar is a pale shadow of what the Mayans accomplished with stone, sweat, and sky. You continue down a gently sloping ramp, pausing to notice the equinox light slicing across carved panels depicting rulers, maize gods, and celestial serpents. Each alignment seems choreographed to communicate power and cosmic order simultaneously. maize, sun, and people, all entwined. You reflect on how this architecture functions on multiple levels: practical, symbolic, political, and spiritual, demonstrating a sophistication that leaves you breathless. Historians still argue whether these precise architectural alignments were widely known, or restricted to a small priestly elite, but the evidence of intentionality is compelling. A sudden rustle of leaves makes you glance up to see a small bird hopping along the terrace stones. You notice how it casts tiny shadows that echo the larger solar patterns, an accidental but charming reminder that nature itself participates in these temporal games. You chuckle at the thought that a hummingbird is, in a sense, a co-observer of the calendar, its wings flickering against millennia-old stone, silently marking time. Fringe scholars even suggest that certain birds' behaviors were noted in codices and incorporated into ritual timing, though historians still debate how literal or metaphorical this integration was. The air warms as the sun climbs higher, illuminating every crack and groove in the pyramid, and you feel the passage of hours as a tactile presence. You imagine priests pacing terraces, calculating the timing of ceremonies, predicting celestial alignments, and coordinating with distant outposts, turning a temple complex into a living clock. The clever use of shadows, niches, and carvings transforms stone into a dynamic, interactive record of time, showing that observation, art, and ritual were inseparable in Mayan culture. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves, carrying a faint scent of flowering vines, and you pause to consider the broader implications. The Mayans. Solar games were not merely decorative, they were instruments of societal cohesion, agricultural planning, and political legitimacy. Every shadow cast by the sun served as a check against disorder, a subtle reminder that human life unfolds in rhythm with cosmic patterns. You smile faintly at the thought that your own daily schedule is dictated by blinking notifications rather than celestial choreography. But you also feel a quiet admiration for the ingenuity of a people who turned stone and light into a living calendar. Descending the final steps, you reflect on the fusion of science, art, and ritual you've just witnessed. The solar alignments aren't isolated tricks. They are part of a broader system that connects daily life, agriculture, politics, and religion to the movements of the sun. You feel a strange kinship with the Mayan observers. Their devotion to the rhythms of the universe mirrors your fascination, albeit in a form far more patient and tactile than your own hurried life. Their shadow games remain a testament to human curiosity, precision, and the joy of aligning with forces far larger than ourselves. You crouch beside a low stone wall, your fingers brushing over faint glyphs that whisper of the moon's gentle, ceaseless sway, and you realize that the Mayans treated lunar phases with as much reverence as the sun. Each carved icon marks the waxing and waning, the bright crescents and disappearing slivers, guiding everything from planting cycles to ceremonial feasts. You imagine priests sitting under the canopy of stars, serving the moon night after night, their fingers tracing cycles and bark paper codices as they murmured prayers to deities of fertility, water, and time. Historians still argue whether lunar observations were strictly agricultural or primarily spiritual, though the overlap seems deliberate. A faint breeze carries the earthy scent of wet jungle soil, and you notice that some glyphs are arranged in what seems like a playful sequence, almost like a board game of days, nights, and omens. It's charming to imagine that centuries ago, someone meticulously tracked the moon's course while humming quietly, perhaps pausing to sip water or swat away mosquitoes, and that their diligent work still survives in these stones. Fringe scholars have suggested that certain markings may encode eclipse predictions, or even more obscure lunar phenomena, though historians still debate the accuracy and intent of these observations. You stand and let your gaze sweep across a courtyard where small altars are aligned in a subtle curve, each oriented to mark a particular phase of the moon. It feels as though the lunar cycle is embedded into the very layout of the architecture, creating a tangible rhythm that people could follow without reading codices. You imagine farmers consulting these patterns before planting maize, priests timing rituals, and rulers announcing events based on the moon's capricious yet predictable movement. A quirky thought pops into your mind. This is essentially a calendar, a nightlight, and a cosmic traffic controller all rolled into one, much more impressive than the blinking reminder on your phone to drink water. A set of glyphs catches your attention: small dots and bars carved carefully into the stone in seemingly endless sequences. These notations correspond to days in a lunar month, allowing the Mayans to predict when the moon would be visible, when it would disappear, and even when it might interact with Venus or other celestial bodies. You trace the grooves with your fingertips and feel the patience embedded in each stroke, a quiet devotion to observation that seems almost meditative. Historians still argue whether these records were used primarily to schedule rituals or as a predictive tool for agriculture and omen reading. The jungle around you hums softly, punctuated by the distant croak of frogs and the faint rustle of leaves. You imagine a priest climbing to an observation point with nothing but darkness above and stone beneath, recording the moon's rise and fall with exquisite precision. The air would have been humid, thick with the scent of rain and earth, while the priest's fingers traced glyphs that contained knowledge far beyond a single human lifetime. You grin at the thought that modern humans struggle to keep track of the moon's phase without checking an app, and yet, here, centuries ago, such knowledge was carved in stone, as reliable as the cycles themselves. You wander closer to a small temple niche, where faded pigments hint at ceremonial use. Inside, you picture rituals aligned with lunar phases, offerings of food, incense, and flowers, timed to specific nights when the moon held particular significance. Perhaps the priests chanted sequences of numbers and glyphs, calculating the right moment for each gesture, each song, each step, weaving celestial events into human activity with a delicate precision that seems lost in contemporary life. Fringe researchers even speculate that some codices may have contained mnemonic systems for these lunar calculations, allowing scribes to perform complex tracking without constant observation, though historians still debate the prevalence of such techniques. You notice a small carving depicting two crescent moons overlapping, a subtle yet sophisticated representation of lunar cycles interacting with each other. You imagine the significance. This symbol may have guided ritualists in predicting dual events, like eclipses, or served as a warning to farmers about an unusual month. It's a tiny flourish of artistry embedded within precision, blending science with symbolism in a way that feels deeply human. Historians still argue whether this represents observational accuracy, symbolic storytelling, or a mixture of both, but the beauty of ambiguity only adds to the allure. A gentle wind lifts leaves and dust around your feet, and you pause to consider the connection between lunar phases and social life. Festivals, births, marriages, and even judicial decisions could be tied to the moon, demonstrating that timekeeping was inseparable from culture. The rhythm of human life intertwined with celestial cycles, creating a society in which the natural and spiritual worlds were inseparable. You smile faintly, thinking about the irony that today we rarely pause to observe such patterns, instead surrendering our schedules to glowing rectangles. You wander to a sun-dappled plaza where the moon's influence is echoed in carvings of water and maize. These glyphs seem to suggest that the lunar cycle dictated not only ceremonial activity, but also agricultural timing, the rise and fall of the moon signaling the best nights for planting, irrigating, or harvesting crops. You kneel to trace a carved sequence and feel the embedded wisdom of centuries, the quiet dialogue between human need and celestial rhythm. Fringe scholars suggest that lunar calendars may have been used to anticipate not just harvests, but social stability, tracking omens that predicted the rise or fall of leaders. Though historians still debate the extent and reliability of these connections. Nearby, a series of small bas-reliefs show priests in motion, moving in time with the moon, carrying instruments or offerings, sometimes depicted alongside glyphs representing lunar phases. You imagine the daily life of these observers, climbing stairs, measuring shadows, chanting numbers, and noting patterns with quiet devotion. The combination of labor, art, and science produces a rhythm that you feel vibrating faintly under your feet, connecting centuries of observation with the present moment. A quirky thought drifts in. You might never fully understand all the calculations. Yet the sheer beauty of the system evokes the same reverence that an orchestra or symphony can inspire without reading a single note. You step back, letting your hands brush over weathered glyphs, imagining the long nights of observation. The careful counting, the subtle adjustments as moonlight shifted across stone markers. You realize that the lunar cycles were not just practical, they were poetic, a daily reminder that life and time are cyclical, interconnected, and larger than a single human lifespan. The Mayans' attention to the moon reflects patience, curiosity, and a sense of harmony with the universe, blending science and ritual into something both functional and profoundly moving. Historians still argue about the exact methods of tracking and calculation, but the impression of disciplined wonder is undeniable. Finally, as the jungle hum softens with the approaching dawn, you lean against the wall, tracing one last sequence of dots and bars. The moon is barely a sliver above the horizon, whispering its age in silver light, and you feel a quiet kinship with those ancient observers. Their lives were organized around these celestial cycles, their days marked by shadow and glow, their ceremonies timed to rhythm and repetition, creating a tapestry of human and cosmic order that still resonates beneath the jungle canopy. You breathe in the scent of damp stone and leaves feeling the slow, steady pulse of lunar time threading through your press. Ruby kiss, only ruby kiss, only ruby kiss. How long's last lossage hast, how log last, how lossage haze, to wreathe us. And leave, log last, lost time. You see with consciousness, and for a moment the centuries collapse, leaving only the enduring dialogue between earth sky and attentive human minds. You wander toward the edge of the plaza, where a small observatory platform rises like a flattened crown above the surrounding jungle, and you notice that the Mayans didn't just observe the sun and moon, they were obsessed with the planets too. Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and especially Venus were tracked with such care that priests could predict appearances, disappearances, and even retrograde motions without the aid of telescopes or modern instruments. You imagine scribes hunched over codices, their quills scratching symbols while the jungle breathed around them, the sound of insects forming a constant rhythmic backdrop. Historians still argue whether planetary observations were purely for ritual purposes, or if they had a practical role in agriculture and political forecasting, though the precision suggests a blend of both. A breeze rustles the leaves overhead, carrying a faint aroma of wildflowers and damp earth, and you crouch to examine a series of glyphs painted onto the platform's wall. They depict the cycles of Venus in astonishing detail, sometimes accompanied by smaller annotations that mark omens or ceremonies. You realize that the priests were not just mathematicians, they were storytellers, weaving human events, celestial rhythms, and symbolic meaning into a single, coherent tapestry. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. Venus was essentially a celebrity in their sky, its appearances dictating the timing of wars and festivals, while your phone alerts you to celebrity birthdays and reality shows. You step closer to the edge, feeling the warm limestone under your palms, and notice the alignment of carved markers with the horizon. Venus's heliacal rising, the first glimpse just before dawn, would have been critical, signaling a window of opportunity for ritual or political action. Some fringe scholars suggest that these markers could also predict eclipses or subtle shifts in planetary conjunctions, though historians still debate whether these were consistently accurate or occasionally symbolic. You smile at the idea that the Mayans were performing celestial calculations that would make a modern astrologer's spreadsheet blush. Looking down, you notice that the platform overlooks a series of smaller temples, each aligned in a subtle arc corresponding to Venus's path across the sky. You imagine priests running from one structure to another, observing and noting, coordinating rituals across space and time, as if orchestrating a cosmic symphony with their bodies, eyes, and pens. The precision required is staggering, and you find yourself laughing softly at the contrast with your own fumbling attempts to organize a calendar in Google Sheets. Historians still argue whether these alignments were fully intentional or evolved over generations, but the result is undeniably elegant. A distant bird cries, and you notice that its shadow flickers across the glyphs like a living pointer. You imagine the priests incorporating these small, uncontrollable elements of nature into their observations. Perhaps seeing the bird as a messenger, a living variable in their cosmic calculations. Some fringe interpretations even suggest that Mayan astronomers considered animal behavior as a minor but meaningful factor in ritual timing, though historians still debate how literal or symbolic such observations were. It's a charming thought. The tiniest creature participating, unknowingly, in a system that stretches across centuries. You crouch to trace a series of dots and bars carved into the stone, a sequence representing days in Venus's cycle. Each bar and dot is a carefully measured unit, the total aligning with the planet's 584-day synodic period. You can almost feel the patience embedded in each groove, the hours of observation under hot sun and dense jungle, counting days, nights, and events with obsessive precision. You stand and glance skyward, imagining the priest's eyes following Venus's slow arc, calculating when it would appear in the morning sky, when it would vanish, and when it would herald critical events. The integration of planetary observation into daily life, ritual, and governance is astonishing. The priests were simultaneously scientists, mathematicians, and storytellers. And you feel a flicker of awe at the human ingenuity required to combine observation, prediction, and social coordination. The platform is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and you notice small indentations that might have been used to rest instruments or even codices. You imagine a young apprentice kneeling here, copying glyphs under the patient guidance of an elder, absorbing decades of knowledge one stroke at a time. It's intimate human work, intertwined with the monumental task of predicting celestial motion. You grin at the thought that your own attempts at timekeeping rely entirely on blinking notifications. A pale echo of the meticulous devotion evident here. Historians still argue whether these apprenticeship systems were standardized or varied widely, but the effect is undeniably profound. You wander to a shaded corner where faded murals depict rituals timed to Venus's rising. Warriors are shown preparing for campaigns. Priests are carrying incense and offerings, and nobles are positioned to witness events aligned with celestial phenomena. The combination of astronomical precision and social orchestration is dazzling. A quirky detail surfaces. Some murals even depict Venus personified as a jaguar-like deity, stalking the horizon, a subtle reminder that observation and mythology were inseparable. Historians still argue whether such anthropomorphizing influenced practical calculations or remained purely symbolic, though either interpretation underscores the fusion of science and art. You pause, letting your hands rest on a warm stone balustrade, and reflect on the complexity of planetary observation without modern tools. The Mayans calculated, predicted, and integrated multiple cycles into a coherent framework that connected rulers, ritual, agriculture, and the cosmos. You feel humbled, imagining nights spent counting, observing, enchanting sequences of numbers under flickering torchlight, while the jungle breathed around you. The dedication is staggering, and you quietly chuckle at how our digital reminders, while convenient, could never capture this poetry of lived astronomy. A soft rustle of leaves reminds you that the jungle itself was part of the system. Wind, humidity, animal behavior, and light all affected observation, making each night slightly different from the last. The priests adapted, adjusted, and persisted. Their knowledge passed down through generations, carved in stone and inked on codices. Fringe scholars even speculate that certain Venus tables may have influenced decisions beyond ritual diplomatic timing. trade negotiations, or even conflict, but historians still debate the extent to which predictive astronomy shaped politics versus ceremony. You glance one last time at Venus gleaming in the dawn sky, tracing its path with your eyes and imagining the precise calculations of observers long gone. Their work reminds you that the universe is not just a backdrop, but a partner in human existence, a rhythm to which one can attune, if only patiently. The combination of mythology, observation, and calendar keeping transforms Venus from a bright dot in the sky into a central character in the Mayan understanding of time, power, and destiny. You feel a quiet thrill, a connection across centuries, as if these distant observers are sharing a small piece of cosmic insight with you through stone, glyphs, and patient observation. The sun rises higher, illuminating the platform, and you realize that the Mayans' planetary systems were not just tools, they were meditations, integrating the practical, political, and spiritual into a seamless whole. You take a slow breath, feeling the pulse of the jungle, the weight of stone beneath your hands, and the distant rhythm of human history echoing through Venus's path. Observing their ingenuity, you can't help but feel that even in your modern, irreed life, there is something to learn from the patient, observant, poetic devotion of these celestial archivists. You wander through a quiet courtyard where the soft rustle of leaves accompanies the faint chirping of birds, and it strikes you that the Mayans' calendars were never isolated instruments. They were integrated into every aspect of life, from politics to agriculture to ritual. The 260-day Tzolk'in, sacred and cyclical, hums through the architecture, carved into stone, etched into codices, and memorized by attentive priests. You imagine a young apprentice, knees scraping against stone, counting days in sequence, learning to associate numbers with gods, festivals, and omens. Historians still argue whether the Tzolk'in functioned more as a spiritual guide, a societal organizer, or an agricultural scheduler, though evidence suggests a sophisticated mixture of all three. A gentle breeze carries the scent of blooming flowers, and you crouch to study a stone bench adorned with intricate glyphs representing the Tzolk'in cycles. Each number, symbol, and dot seems deliberate, a compact narrative of time that also guides behavior. You imagine the priests' voices murmuring the sequence aloud, a rhythmic chant echoing against the stone walls, marking each day with solemnity and precision. A quirky thought enters your mind. The Tzolk'in is essentially a cosmic playlist, a repeating rhythm that dictates when to sow, feast, or prepare for ritual far more poetic than your weekly calendar app. You step toward a ceremonial plaza where small altars are aligned to mark the interlocking cycles of Tzolk'in and Hob, the 365-day solar calendar. These dual systems intersect like overlapping gears, creating a calendrical framework that maps both sacred time and civil life. You notice faded glyphs indicating specific festivals, noting the interplay between agricultural seasons, lunar cycles, and social obligations. Fringe scholars suggest that this interlocking system may have functioned as an early form of social engineering, subtly coordinating labor, religion, and politics. Historians still argue whether the overlap was fully intentional or evolved naturally, but the practical elegance is undeniable. A bird flits across the plaza, and its shadow dances over a sequence of glyphs depicting day signs and gods. You pause to trace the symbols with your fingers, noting the cyclical patterns and how each day is associated with particular deities, omens, and actions. The Tzolk'in is not simply a counting system. It is a living map of moral, spiritual, and social guidance. You smile faintly at the thought that this is humanity's ultimate to-do list, meticulously carved and interpreted over generations, far more elaborate than any planner you've ever used. You wander toward a carved stela, its surface worn smooth by centuries of touch. Here, day signs are combined with numerical coefficients, producing sequences that could calculate auspicious days for ceremonies, market activity, or travel. You imagine priests consulting these steely, cross-referencing solar and sacred calendars, determining the precise timing for planting maize or launching a political decree. Historians still argue whether these calculations were universally applied or selectively. But the system's complexity is breathtaking. Sunlight glances across the courtyard, highlighting subtle carvings of serpents, jaguars, and maize gods intertwined with numerical glyphs. You crouch to study a sequence where a day sign coincides with a deity of rain. The interweaving of natural cycles and spiritual symbolism becomes evident. Timekeeping was inseparable from ecological observation. The Mayans were not merely observing days. They were tracking patterns in the sky, earth, and human behavior, encoding survival strategies in myth and number. Fringe scholars suggest that some day signs may encode long-term climate patterns, though historians still debate the literal versus symbolic intent. A gentle vibration of the jungle surrounds you, a rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the distant call of monkeys, and you imagine priests chanting Tzolk'in sequences in harmony with these sounds. Each day carries a unique combination of number and deity, and you realize that living within this calendar would give every moment meaning. You feel the pulse of cyclical time under your skin, a rhythm you could almost step to, unlike the linear rush of modern schedules. You notice small niches carved along the plaza walls, where offerings of maize, flowers, or incense were likely placed according to Tzolk'in guidance. Each niche corresponds to specific day signs, a tangible way of synchronizing human activity with sacred and agricultural time. You imagine priests checking these niches daily, ensuring that offerings align with cycles, while apprentices memorize sequences that span months or years. Historians still argue whether these rituals were performed with exactitude or adapted flexibly. But the layered integration of calendar, myth, and practice is undeniable. Moving toward a shaded stairway, you examine glyphs etched along each riser, revealing interlaced Tzolk'in and hob markers. Each step seems to carry both temporal and symbolic weight, and you imagine pilgrims ascending slowly, chanting the day signs under breath, internalizing cycles of time as both spiritual practice and cognitive exercise. A quirky thought pops into your head. Climbing these stairs was essentially a moving calendar, a physical rehearsal of sacred chronology. Historians still debate how widely the populace understood these systems, but the ritualized embodiment of time is clear. You pause near a mural, depicting a priest measuring the shadow of a niche at noon, correlating solar observations with Tzolk'in cycles. You trace the lines with your fingers, imagining how the observation of shadows and light created an elegant synchrony between sacred days and solar realities. This interplay of observation and ritual seems almost meditative, a gentle reminder that measurement, myth, and daily life are inseparable in Mayan culture. Fringe scholars propose that some murals encode mnemonic aids for performing calculations, though historians still argue whether such techniques were widespread or elite knowledge. A soft breeze carries a faint trace of smoke, and you imagine ceremonies taking place in this courtyard, timed with Tzolk'in sequences, offerings, dances, prayers, and divinations. Each act aligns with cosmic and earthly rhythms, reinforcing social cohesion and spiritual awareness. You feel a profound respect for the integration of calendars into life, where timekeeping is not abstract but intimately connected to lived experience. The repetition, cycles, and interlocking patterns create a kind of temporal poetry, both practical and beautiful. You wander toward a corner where small glyphs, nearly invisible, mark unusual day combinations. These may have signaled rare events, eclipses, or special omens, hinting at a layered understanding of both time and human fortune. You marvel at the complexity. A culture capable of encoding cosmic patterns into daily schedules, spiritual observances, and agricultural cycles, all in a system that required no modern instruments beyond observation, memory, and dedication. Historians still debate how exact these rare event predictions were, but their ambition alone is inspiring. Sitting on a warm stone ledge, you trace the glyphs with your fingers, imagining centuries of attentive hands passing over the same patterns, chanting numbers, learning cycles, embedding knowledge into flesh and mind. You feel a quiet kinship with these ancient observers whose daily lives were attuned to the rhythm of celestial and terrestrial cycles. You smile at the thought that even now, the same sequences whisper from stone, connecting you to the distant past in a tactile, resonant dialogue. Finally, as sunlight filters through the leaves, illuminating the plaza in dappled gold, you reflect on the Tzolk'in's role in shaping society. It was not merely a calendar. It was a moral guide, an agricultural aid, a ritual framework, and a cognitive scaffold. The interlocking cycles of sacred and solar time demonstrate that the Mayans approached temporality with a richness and depth that modern linear frameworks can barely comprehend. You inhale the jungle air, feeling the pulse of cyclical time, the resonance of observation and ritual, and the quiet genius of a people who turned numbers, myths, and celestial patterns into a living, breathing calendar. You wander along a shaded causeway, the sun filtering through the dense canopy in thin, golden shafts, and you notice how the Mayans' calendars were not just tools for daily life, they were instruments for prophecy, for divination, and even for negotiating the future. The sacred Tzolk'in, with its 260-day cycle, intersects with historical memory inscribed in steely codices and ceremonial glyphs, offering guidance on when battles, rituals, or political decisions should take place. You imagine a priest consulting these overlapping cycles while murmuring a string of numbers under his breath, each day a key to unlocking cosmic favor. Historians still argue whether these predictions were interpreted literally or symbolically, though their influence on society is undeniable. A soft breeze rustles the leaves overhead, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and flowering vines, and you crouch to trace a glyph depicting a jaguar, a symbol associated with strength, the underworld, and temporal power. You imagine priests noting the day signs, combining them with numerical coefficients, and then declaring auspicious days for rulers, harvests, or journeys. A quirky thought floats into your mind. The jaguar, in all its mystical majesty, might have been as much a cosmic consultant as a literal animal, silently approving or vetoing human endeavors depending on celestial alignment. Fringe scholars suggest that certain glyphs encode predictive omens, though historians still debate whether these prophecies were consistently reliable or selectively interpreted. You step toward a stela that chronicles the reign of a long-forgotten king, carved with precision and care, each day marked with glyphs and dots, a dual record of temporal and political authority. The combination of long count Tzolk'in and Hob calendars here illustrates an astonishingly sophisticated approach to recording history and forecasting events. You lean closer, imagining scribes counting cycles, noting planetary alignments, and considering past omens to anticipate future challenges. Historians still argue whether such records were primarily political propaganda, spiritual guidance, or a careful blend of both, but the overlap of timekeeping, mythology, and governance is mesmerizing. You wander to a sunlit corner where small niches mark ritual offerings. You can almost hear the whispers of priests chanting sequences, each number resonating with cosmic rhythm as they place maize, jade, or incense into the stone receptacles. The alignment of sacred days, solar positions, and ritual objects creates a layered map of human and celestial interaction. Fringe theories suggest that these niches might have been mnemonic aids, helping observers track multiple cycles simultaneously, though historians still debate whether this method was widespread or reserved for elite priestly classes. A gentle wind stirs, and you notice tiny carved grooves along the terrace, sequences representing unusual day combinations. You imagine apprentices tracing these patterns with their fingers, chanting numbers as part of their training, internalizing cycles that interweave sacred, solar, and planetary time. You smile at the thought. This was hands-on education in cosmic rhythm, far more engaging than any modern lecture. Historians still argue whether these mnemonic practices were standardized or varied across cities. But the concept of embodied calendrical knowledge is clear. From your vantage point, the jungle stretches endlessly, alive with birds, insects, and distant howls. You imagine priests climbing terraces to observe the horizon, noting the rising of Venus, the waxing of the moon, or the precise shadows cast by the sun. Each observation was not isolated. It fed into a comprehensive system where celestial events dictated ritual timing, agricultural work, and social coordination. A quirky comparison drifts into your mind. Your calendar app can alert you to birthdays and meetings, but it can't align society with the motion of planets, the sun and the moon simultaneously. You pause to examine a mural depicting a ceremony aligned with a Venus rising, the priestly figures carrying instruments and offerings, while glyphs denote Tzolk'in days and long count cycles. You realize the depth of integration. Astronomical observation, calendar knowledge, and ritual practice combined to orchestrate society's rhythm. Fringe scholars suggest some murals may encode predictive calculations for rare celestial events, though historians still debate whether these were routinely employed or selectively ceremonial. The layers of meaning are dizzying, as if each stroke of paint contains a secret calculation. You crouch to trace a sequence of glyphs showing interlocking cycles of Tzolk'in, Hob, and the long count. The complexity is overwhelming, yet elegant. A dynamic web of time, prediction, and myth. You imagine priests working late into the night, observing stars, counting days, and preparing ceremonies that reflect the interplay of human life with cosmic order. The meticulous labor echoes through the centuries, leaving a tangible, enduring record in stone and codices. Historians still argue about the exact methods used to synchronize these calendars, but their sophistication is undeniable. A faint rustle draws your attention to a bird hopping along the terrace stones, casting fleeting shadows over the glyphs. You chuckle, imagining that the smallest creatures were unintentionally participants in this cosmic bookkeeping. A living punctuation mark on a system spanning centuries. Fringe scholars even suggest that animal behavior may have been incorporated into predictive frameworks, though historians still debate the literal versus symbolic significance of such observations. You step back, letting your hands rest on the warm stone, and reflect on the role of the calendars in political life. Kings and queens used Tzolk'in sequences to legitimize actions, schedule campaigns, and demonstrate alignment with divine rhythms. Each date chosen for a festival or conquest was supported by an intricate understanding of cosmic cycles, conveying power and foresight. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Imagine modern politicians consulting planetary positions before passing legislation. Less absurd than it sounds, considering the stakes these priests faced with wars, harvests, and omens. Historians still argue whether predictive use was more symbolic or practical, but the strategy is fascinating. You wander toward a quiet terrace, noticing niches where offerings once rested, aligned to both celestial events and sequences. You imagine priests meticulously checking these placements, ensuring alignment with sacred days, solar positions, and lunar phases. The physical and symbolic integration of timekeeping, ritual, an observation creates a tapestry that is as functional as it is beautiful. Fringe scholars suggest that some niches encoded predictive tools for rare celestial events, though historians still debate the prevalence and precision of these practices. Finally, as sunlight warms the plaza and the jungle hum intensifies, you feel a quiet awe at the scope of Mayan calendrical knowledge. Each cycle, glyph, and ceremonial alignment represents centuries of observation, meticulous calculation, and cultural embedding. You inhale the humid, fragrant air and imagine the priest's devotion, tracing numbers, watching the sky, recording omens, and guiding society with a patient, almost meditative rhythm. The interplay of Tzolk'in, Hob, long count, lunar cycles, and planetary observation forms a multi-layered system of timekeeping, prediction, and ritual. a legacy that continues to whisper its genius across centuries. You wander through a shaded corridor where faint hieroglyphs crawl along the limestone walls. And it strikes you that the Mayans' long count calendar is perhaps their boldest statement about time. A linear, almost audacious attempt to measure history over millennia. Unlike the cyclical Tzolk'in or the solar hob, the long count records date sequentially, numbering days from a mythical creation point, a cosmic day zero that stretches the imagination as easily as it stretches numbers. You picture scribes in flickering torchlight, calculating baktons, kietons, and tons. Their quills dancing across bark paper codices with patient precision. Historians still argue whether the long count was used primarily to record historical events, ritual anniversaries, or both, though the interplay with social and cosmic time is undeniable. A gentle wind lifts the faint aroma of damp stone and flowers, and you crouch to study a carved stela marking a king's reign in long count notation. Each digit, each dot and bar, corresponds to days counted over centuries, bridging human lifespans with cosmic cycles. You imagine priests reciting sequences aloud. The rhythm of counting acting like a chant, a meditative affirmation that human action exists within a grand, measurable continuum. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. Modern historians might struggle with Excel spreadsheets. Yet these ancient record keepers managed multi-millennium calculations with nothing more than bark, ink, and patient observation. You step toward a platform where a series of glyphs align with shadows cast by the afternoon sun, marking both celestial and historical events. You notice subtle correlations. The long count dates correspond to solar and lunar observations, aligning myth, ritual, and historical memory. Fringe scholars suggest that some sequences even encode planetary conjunctions, though historians still debate the precision and purpose of these calculations. You smile faintly at the thought that stone and shadow together created a living, interactive record of time, an astronomical calculator built from observation and devotion. A distant bird flits across the plaza, its shadow briefly tracing a line over glyphs depicting previous kings and sacred events. You crouch and trace the marks, imagining apprentices memorizing sequences, internalizing centuries of cosmic and human history. The long count is not merely numerical. It is narrative, linking human rulers, societal milestones, and mythic events to the endless march of days. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on long-term chronology influenced political legitimacy, ritual timing, or historical consciousness. Though all three seem plausible, you wander toward a shaded stairway where carvings mark Bactance units of 144,000 days, roughly 394 years each. You try to imagine living with such scales of time, seeing yourself as a small part of a vast temporal chain, your daily life nested within cycles so long they outlast empires. A quirky thought surfaces. The Mayans were calculating millennia while we panic over the next software update. Fringe scholars even speculate that long count inscriptions anticipated astronomical events thousands of years in advance. Though historians still debate whether these were literal predictions or symbolic gestures of cosmic awareness. The jungle hums around you, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of insects, the distant howl of a howler monkey, and you imagine priests chanting dates aloud, translating abstract numbers into ritual action. The long count transforms the present into both reflection and forecast, linking the ephemeral human moment with cosmic order. You pause at a mural depicting a king offering tribute, noting that the date carved alongside him situates this act within centuries of recorded history. Historians still argue whether such records were intended for public memory, elite instruction, or spiritual resonance, though the combination is undeniably powerful. You crouch to examine a codex fragment showing interlocking long count and Tzolk'in dates, a sophisticated integration of linear and cyclical time. The scribes managed multiple calendars simultaneously, navigating complex relationships between sacred cycles, solar patterns, and historical events. You imagine apprentices reciting these sequences nightly, the cadence of numbers acting as both education and meditation. Fringe scholars suggest that the interplay may have helped anticipate eclipses or planetary events. Though historians still debate the extent and accuracy of predictive methods, a faint streak of sunlight highlights a carving where two backtons are juxtaposed with ceremonial imagery, linking rulers' deeds to cosmic cycles. You trace the intricate dots and bars with your fingers, imagining centuries of meticulous observation and record-keeping. The long count is as much an intellectual endeavor as it is spiritual, mapping human actions onto a timeline that transcends immediate lifetimes. A quirky comparison drifts through your mind. It's as if the Mayans were running a time machine with ink, stone, and memory. And yet the effect feels simultaneously practical, symbolic, and poetic. You step to the edge of the courtyard, feeling the smooth limestone beneath your palms, and consider how the long count shaped historical consciousness. Kings, reigns, wars, ceremonies, and cosmic events are all embedded in this temporal framework, allowing society to situate itself within both earthly and celestial time. Historians still argue whether this chronological rigor influenced political authority more than religious practice. But the integration of memory, myth, and mathematics is undeniable. A subtle rustle in the undergrowth makes you glance up, imagining priests consulting the horizon for planetary alignments, eclipses, or solstice shadows. Cross-referencing these observations with a long count. Each act of observation, each inked glyph, each carved dot bridges centuries, creating a layered system of knowledge that is simultaneously precise and poetic. Fringe scholars suggest that some inscriptions may encode cycles spanning thousands of years, though historians still debate whether this was practical calculation or symbolic assertion. You pause at a niche where offerings once rested, aligned to mark both ceremonial dates and long-term cycles. You imagine priests placing maize, jade, or incense to honor both deities and temporal milestones, reinforcing the sacredness of recorded time. The integration of ritual, astronomy, and calendar demonstrates a sophistication rarely matched in human history. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Your alarm clock can't do this, and yet here, stone and ink are tracking millennia. Walking toward the exit of the courtyard, you glance back at glyphs marking previous backtons and ceremonial dates. You imagine centuries of observation condensed into precise carvings. Each sequence a monument to human patience, intelligence, and devotion. The long count ties together kings, priests, celestial bodies, and commoners in an interwoven narrative of cosmic and human time. Historians still argue whether the long count was primarily a practical tool, a spiritual record, or a political instrument, but the sheer ambition and elegance are indisputable. Finally, as the jungle hum softens with the approach of dusk, you lean against the warm stone, tracing one last series of dots and bars. You feel the vastness of time under your fingers, the patient calculations, the chanting, the observing, and the offering of centuries of human attention to the skies. The long count, with its audacious scale, reminds you that humans have long sought to place their fleeting lives within the unending rhythm of the cosmos, to measure, predict, and honor the flow of time itself. You breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of stone, earth, and leaves, and feel a quiet kinship with those distant observers whose devotion to temporal order continues to whisper across the ages. You stroll into a quiet courtyard where the faint hum of cicadas blends with distant bird calls, and it becomes clear that the Mayans' calendrical genius was not simply about counting days, it was about orchestrating life itself. Every cycle, every glyph, every interlocking calendar influenced social, religious, and agricultural rhythms, transforming time from an abstract concept into something tangible, almost tactile. You imagine a priest carefully consulting a Tzolk'in sequence while observing Venus's position, calculating the exact moment for a festival, a harvest, or a political decree. Historians still argue whether commoners internalized these calendars in the same nuanced way as the priestly elite, though evidence suggests that ritual observances permeated daily life. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead, carrying the faint scent of jungle flowers and damp earth. You crouch to trace glyphs etched into the stone, depicting both day signs and numerical coefficients. Each mark seems alive, resonating with cycles of fertility, rain, war, and cosmic balance. You imagine priests chanting these sequences aloud, a rhythmic cadence that infused everyday life with meaning, guiding actions with the gentle authority of the cosmos. A quirky thought drifts through your mind. It says as if their entire society was a living calendar, an organic spreadsheet operated by devotion, observation, and ritual. Moving toward a sunlit terrace, you notice niches aligned to celestial events and Tzolk'in cycles. You imagine offerings maize, flowers, incense placed with precision according to sacred days, while apprentices memorize the sequences, internalizing cosmic rhythms. Fringe scholars suggest that these niches may also have served as mnemonic aids for tracking planetary alignments, though historians still debate the sophistication and spread of these methods. The integration of observation, calculation, and ritual is mesmerizing. Each day becomes a bridge between human experience and cosmic order. You step to a shaded stairway where glyphs marking interlocking cycles of Tzolk'in, Hob, and long count climb like a ladder to the sky. Each step carries symbolic and practical weight, representing sacred and solar time while guiding ritual practice. You imagine pilgrims ascending slowly, chanting sequences under breath, embodying the calendar physically and mentally. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Climbing this staircase is essentially a moving, living rehearsal of time, far more engaging than any modern lecture or app reminder. Historians still argue whether this embodied practice was common or limited to ritual specialists, but the effect is undeniable. Sunlight glances across a mural depicting priests and warriors preparing for ceremonies, their actions meticulously timed to interlocking calendars. You trace the painted lines with your fingers, imagining the hours spent observing shadows, tracking Venus, and chanting sequences. The synchronization of celestial observation, ritual action, and social coordination is staggering. It transforms the abstract flow of time into something immediately practical and symbolically resonant. Fringe scholars propose that some murals encode predictive sequences for rare celestial events, though historians still debate whether these predictions were literal or primarily symbolic. You crouch beside a stela carved with numerical notations, counting days in the long count interwoven with Tzolk'in and Hob cycles. The precision is staggering. Each dot, bar, and glyph represents careful calculation over decades or centuries, mapping human events onto cosmic time. You imagine apprentices copying sequences meticulously, chanting them nightly, internalizing a rhythm that transcends generations. A quirky thought surfaces. Modern humans might struggle with multi-sheet spreadsheets, yet these ancient observers orchestrated millennia with bark, ink, and devotion. A soft rustle in the undergrowth reminds you that the jungle itself was part of the observational system. Wind, humidity, animal movement, all variables that priests had to account for when noting celestial events. You imagine them pausing, adjusting calculations, and recording nuances in codices, creating a resilient and adaptive calendar system. Historians still argue how systematic these adjustments were, but the persistence and accuracy of their records speak to remarkable observational skill. You notice faint carvings of jaguars, serpents, and maize gods alongside the long count, Tzolk'in, and Hob markers. Each figure carries symbolic weight, linking moral, spiritual, and agricultural guidance to numerical cycles. The integration of mythology and measurement illustrates that Mayan timekeeping was not a sterile science but a deeply human endeavor, a blend of story, ritual, and empirical observation. Fringe scholars suggest that symbolic representations may also encode predictive information, though historians still debate whether these systems were practical, symbolic, or both simultaneously. A bird flits across the terrace, casting fleeting shadows on the glyphs, and you imagine priests interpreting these small, uncontrollable phenomena alongside celestial calculations. The interplay between predictable cycles and ephemeral events mirrors the balance between structure and chance in human life. You chuckle quietly at the thought. Even in the jungle, tiny creatures participate unknowingly in millennia-spanning systems of observation and ritual. Historians still argue whether animal behavior influenced calendrical decisions, though the possibility adds a charming living dimension to the system. You wander to a corner where faded pigments suggest ceremonial use, imagining priests coordinating offerings according to sacred days and cosmic cycles. The rhythm of placement, observation, and ritual transforms mundane activity into a precise orchestration of time and meaning. A quirky mental image forms. The Mayans essentially ran a society-wide orchestra with stone, kank, and devotion as instruments, the priests as conductors, and the cosmos itself as a co-performer. Historians still debate how much the general populace understood of these layered systems, though ritual and festival participation indicate widespread engagement. Sunlight shifts across the courtyard, highlighting niches aligned to Venus's rising, lunar phases, and solar events, integrating planetary, lunar, and solar observation into daily life. You imagine the mental discipline required to track multiple cycles simultaneously, converting astronomical observation into societal coordination. Fringe scholars suggest that rare celestial events may have been anticipated with astonishing accuracy, though historians still argue about the methods and consistency of such predictions. You pause, feeling the weight of centuries in your fingers as you trace glyphs marking overlapping cycles. The Mayans' calendrical systems are not just records, they are frameworks for thought, action, and societal cohesion. Each day carries meaning, each observation resonates through generations, and each ritual embodies both prediction and poetic interpretation of cosmic rhythms. You breathe slowly, inhaling the earthy, fragrant air, and sense the pulse of history vibrating beneath a stone. Finally, as the jungle hum softens with the approach of evening, you reflect on the remarkable integration of Tzolk'in, long count, lunar phases, and planetary observation. The Mayans did not merely measure time, they wove it into life itself, embedding human activity within cosmic rhythms, creating a society attuned to the cycles of the universe. You exhale, feeling a profound kinship with those ancient observers whose devotion, observation, and ceremonial precision continue to whisper through the centuries, guiding you gently into a deeper understanding of time, both measured and lived. You wander into a shadowed plaza where vines creep along weathered stone, and it occurs to you that the Mayans' mastery of cyclical and linear time was inseparable from their understanding of cosmic interplay. Each calendar system, the sacred Tzolk'in, solar hob, lunar observations, planetary tables, and the long count overlaps, creating a multi-layered map of reality that governs not only what humans do, but when they do it. You imagine priests pacing slowly across terraces, chanting day signs, counting tons, and kayatones while observing Venus's brilliant path, the waxing moon, and the rising sun, their devotion acting as both calculation and meditation. Historians still argue whether these calendars were designed primarily for societal control, spiritual insight, or practical guidance, though all three appear intertwined. A soft breeze lifts the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, and you crouch to examine a glyph-rich wall showing interwoven Tzolk'in and hob sequences. Each dot, bar, and deity symbol represents a precise intersection of sacred and solar time, a temporal choreography that guided agriculture, ritual, and political authority. You imagine apprentices reciting sequences aloud, embedding cycles into memory, internalizing both cosmic order and social expectation. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. It says as if the entire city was a living metronome, keeping time with the sky while humans danced to its rhythm. Fringe scholars suggest that these sequences may have served as mnemonic devices for astronomical calculations, though historians still debate the sophistication of their application. You step closer to a small temple where a faded mural depicts priests coordinating rituals according to Venus and lunar phases. You trace the lines with your fingers, imagining the hours spent observing, recording, and chanting, each act linking human life to cosmic patterns. The mural shows warriors preparing for campaigns, dancers performing ceremonial movements, and offerings meticulously aligned with sacred days. Historians still argue whether these events were primarily political, ritualistic, or social. But the overlap demonstrates an impressive integration of observation and action. A rustle of leaves overhead draws your attention to a shadow flickering across carved glyphs depicting lunar cycles and day signs. You imagine the priests noting subtle discrepancies between predicted and observed phases, adjusting sequences accordingly, a living feedback system harmonizing human calculation with natural variability. Fringe researchers even suggest that these observations may have included predictions for eclipses or unusual lunar events, though historians still debate the reliability and intent of such calculations. A quirky mental image forms: an apprentice squinting at the horizon, chalk in hand, trying not to sneeze while observing the perfect crescent moon. Discipline meets cosmic patience. You wander toward a courtyard where niches mark offerings for specific days, lunar phases, and planetary alignments. You imagine priests placing maize, jade, or incense to honor both celestial patterns and human cycles. Each gesture reinforces the interdependence of calendars, observation, and ritual. Historians still argue whether such practices were strictly codified or adapted flexibly depending on local conditions, though the precision and symbolism are undeniable. You smile at the thought that every mundane act from planting corn to lighting an incense coil was harmonized with the stars. Sunlight filters through the canopy, illuminating a carved stela recording the reign of a ruler alongside Tzolk'in, Hob, and long count dates. You trace the dots and bars with your fingertips, imagining scribes consulting celestial tables, noting Venus's position, and calculating auspicious days for political or ceremonial action. The precision is breathtaking, a multi-layered system that measures human ambition against cosmic rhythm. Fringe scholars propose that planetary cycles may have influenced decisions as subtle as trade negotiations or warfare timing, though historians still debate the extent of practical application. You crouch by a series of etched glyphs indicating unusual day combinations, rare conjunctions, or celestial events. Each symbol represents a carefully tracked intersection of cycles, a predictive tool bridging the sacred and the mundane. You imagine apprentices memorizing these sequences, reciting them nightly, and internalizing patterns that span decades or centuries. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. This is essentially a human algorithm. It's executed with bark, ink, and human devotion rather than silicon and electricity. Historians still argue whether the average citizen could interpret these complex patterns, though ritual participation likely ensured broad awareness. A distant bird cries, and you notice its shadow moving across the wall of glyphs. You imagine priests considering these subtle, uncontrollable elements as part of their observations, integrating the unpredictable into an otherwise precise system. Fringe scholars suggest that animal behavior may have informed omens or calendrical adjustments, though historians still debate whether such integration was symbolic, practical, or both. The thought adds a charmingly chaotic element to a system otherwise defined by meticulous order. You step toward a shaded terrace where faded murals depict priests and nobles observing celestial events. Their instruments simple yet effective: shadow-casting markers, alignment stones, and codices to record data. You imagine the discipline required to maintain accuracy over decades, the dedication to observation, calculation, and ritual. Each act connects human decision-making to cosmic rhythm, reinforcing social and spiritual cohesion. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was highly centralized or diffused, though the results indicate a society profoundly attuned to temporal and celestial patterns. Sunlight glints across carved niches marking lunar phases, Hab months, and Tzolk'in days, reminding you that the Mayans measured time not only for observation, but for orchestration, scheduling festivals, harvests, rituals, and political events with cosmic precision. You imagine the choreography of society, every priest, farmer, and ruler moving in harmony with the rhythm of the heavens. A quirky thought pops into your head. The city itself was like a giant metronome, ticking to the beat of Venus, the moon, and the sun. Fringe scholars suggest that these patterns might also encode long-term climate observation, though historians still debate the accuracy and intent of such interpretations. You crouch beside a stone slab showing overlapping calendar sequences, tracing the long count digits, Tzolk'in day signs, and Hab months. The tactile sense of measurement, prediction, and ritual is palpable. You imagine the laborious copying, observation, and mental calculations involved. The dedication necessary to maintain such a system across generations. Historians still argue whether the long count was widely understood beyond elites or remained largely symbolic, though its presence in monumental inscriptions indicates its societal importance. A gentle breeze stirs the air, carrying the scent of earth and vegetation, and you reflect on the integration of lunar, solar, planetary, and ceremonial cycles into a coherent temporal framework. Life, ritual, politics, and agriculture are all harmonized with cosmic rhythms, creating a society that experiences time not as abstract, but as lived, tangible, and intertwined with the universe. Fringe scholars speculate that some calendars even allowed the Mayans to anticipate rare celestial events with remarkable accuracy, though historians still debate the methods and intent. Finally, as the jungle softens into the early evening hum, you pause, imagining centuries of observation, chanting, offering, and recording. The Mayans' integration of cyclical and linear time, celestial observation, and ritual practice illustrates a profound human desire to situate fleeting life within a vast, ordered cosmos. You breathe deeply, inhaling the earth, stone, and foliage, feeling a quiet kinship with those distant observers whose devotion and ingenuity continue to whisper across centuries, inviting you to step lightly into the rhythm of cosmic time. You wander into a quiet, sun-dappled courtyard where the soft rustle of leaves blends with distant bird calls, and you begin to grasp that Mayan calendrical sophistication was as much about connecting humans to the cosmos as it was about counting days. The integration of Tzolk'in, Hab, long count, lunar cycles, and planetary observations was not merely practical, it was philosophical, social, and poetic. You imagine priests pacing terraces, eyes trained on Venus, the moon, and the horizon, their minds running multiple overlapping sequences, translating celestial motion into ritual timing, agricultural guidance, and political instruction. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was tightly guarded or widely disseminated, though evidence points to a blend of elite control and popular participation. A gentle breeze carries the earthy scent of moss and damp stone, and you crouch to study glyphs marking Tzolk'in day signs paired with long count notations. Each dot, bar, and figure represents a sequence of days carefully observed, recorded, and interpreted, a living rhythm that integrates human activity with cosmic cycles. You imagine apprentices reciting these sequences, internalizing patterns that dictate festival timing, harvest schedules, and political ceremonies. A quirky thought drifts in. The Mayans effectively created a human-scale cosmic clock, with priests as the gears and codices as the springs. Fringe scholars suggest that the sequences may also contain encoded astronomical predictions, though historians still debate their accuracy and practical use. You step closer to a mural depicting Venus rising above a ceremonial platform, priests and nobles aligned with both the planet and the sacred calendar. The artwork shows dancers performing elaborate rituals, offerings meticulously arranged, and scribes recording observations all synchronized to cosmic patterns. You imagine the quiet concentration required to maintain this orchestration. Every day, every season, every planetary alignment contributing to societal cohesion. Historians still argue whether these events were primarily symbolic, political, or ritualistic, though the overlap is undeniably elegant. A bird flits across the mural, its shadow briefly touching a glyph depicting lunar phases. And you chuckle at the idea that even the smallest creatures were unwitting participants in celestial bookkeeping. Fringe scholars suggest that animal behavior may have informed minor calendrical adjustments, though historians still debate the literal versus symbolic significance. You crouch and trace the dots and bars representing chaetons and bactons, the larger units of a long count, imagining the multi-generational observation, counting, and recording required to maintain accuracy across centuries. You wander toward a sunlit terrace where niches align with both solar and sacred calendars. Each niche likely held offerings timed to 2 Tzolk'in days or lunar phases, bridging ritual, agriculture, and celestial observation. You imagine priests adjusting offerings according to planetary positions, recording variations, and teaching apprentices to interpret the patterns. A quirky thought occurs. The Mayans ran an entire civilization like a meticulously orchestrated symphony, where humans, stone, and stars all played their parts. Historians still argue whether these practices were standardized or varied widely across regions, though their presence demonstrates remarkable continuity and sophistication. The jungle hums around you, and you feel the pulse of life echoing through the terraces, platforms, and stelae. Each observation of Venus, the moon, or the sun contributes to a living understanding of time, layered with myth, ritual, and practical guidance. You pause to study a carved stela showing a ruler's succession date alongside Tzolk'in and long count sequences. The integration of historical, ceremonial, and celestial records illustrates a culture deeply attuned to both human and cosmic rhythms. Fringe scholars even propose that some inscriptions anticipate rare celestial phenomena, though historians still debate the methods used to encode and calculate these events. You crouch to examine smaller glyphs at the base of the stela, noting day signs paired with deities associated with fertility, war, and agriculture. Each combination creates a nuanced narrative linking human behavior to cosmic rhythm. You imagine apprentices chanting these sequences, internalizing cycles, and using them to guide both ritual and practical activity. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. The Mayans may have memorized what modern humans can barely track with spreadsheets, combining devotion, observation, and mnemonic skill. Historians still argue how widely such knowledge was understood beyond priestly classes, though ritual participation suggests broad societal engagement. A shaft of sunlight illuminates a terrace where faded murals depict priests measuring shadows, plotting planetary positions, and consulting codices. You imagine the rhythm of observation, noting the sun's angle at noon, charting Venus's appearance, and recording lunar phases, all aligned with sacred cycles. Fringe scholars suggest that these sequences may have helped anticipate eclipses or rare planetary events, though historians still debate the precision and practical intent of such predictions. The meticulous observation and calculation create a system both predictive and profoundly integrated with daily life. You step toward a niche marking lunar phases, tracing faded glyphs indicating moonrise, moonset, and phase-specific rituals. Each observation contributes to a larger framework integrating Tzolk'in, Hob, long count, and celestial cycles. You imagine priests coordinating communal festivals with precise lunar timing, ensuring that offerings, dances, and ceremonies align with cosmic rhythms. A quirky mental image arises, apprentices balancing codices on their knees while squinting at a crescent moon, learning not just to observe, but to inhabit the rhythms of time itself. Sunlight shifts, casting long shadows over glyphs, denoting chaeton cycles and planetary alignments. You pause, feeling the weight of centuries in each mark, imagining generations of priests and scribes preserving knowledge, maintaining continuity, and ensuring that cosmic and human time remained intertwined. Historians still argue whether the long count and other cycles primarily reinforced social hierarchy or served as spiritual guides, though the integration of all systems indicates both. You crouch beside a stone bench where offerings may have been placed, imagining the careful alignment of objects with sacred days, lunar phases, and planetary events. Each gesture integrates observation, ritual, and practical guidance, reinforcing the living calendar through tangible, daily acts. Fringe scholars suggest that some placements may encode predictive data, though historians still debate the methods and reliability. The thought that every act, from maize planting to ritual offering, could be synchronized with cosmic rhythm is almost dizzying in its precision. You step back, tracing the layered, interlocking calendars across walls, terraces, and niches. The Mayans were not merely counting days, they were weaving human activity into the fabric of the cosmos. Each observation, ritual, and offering embodies a philosophy that links personal action, societal cohesion, and celestial cycles. Historians still argue how much of this system was widely understood, though the pervasive integration suggests that its effects were felt broadly. Finally, as the sun dips lower and shadows stretch across the plaza, you pause to reflect on the Mayans' temporal genius. The careful synchronization of Tzolk'in, long count, lunar cycles, and planetary observation demonstrates a society attuned to cosmic rhythm, embedding knowledge, ritual, and prediction into the lived experience of generations. You inhale deeply, savoring the humid, earthy air, and feel a quiet kinship with those ancient observers, whose devotion, patience, and imagination continue to whisper across centuries, offering a window into a worldview both precise and profoundly human. You step into a quiet temple courtyard where the sunlight filters through vines and the distant hum of cicadas vibrates through stone, and you realize that the Mayans' calendrical systems were as much social frameworks as they were astronomical instruments. The interplay between Tzolk'in, long count, lunar cycles, and planetary observations shaped ritual, agriculture, and governance, making time a living, breathing guide for daily life. You imagine priests pacing terraces, observing Venus's brilliant rise, noting moon phases, and chanting sequences that align human activity with cosmic rhythm. Historians still argue whether these calendars were fully understood by commoners, though festival participation and ritual practice suggest broader engagement than elite scholarship alone. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying the scent of wet stone and flowering vines. You crouch to examine glyphs showing interlocking cycles, each dot and bar a link in a vast temporal chain. Apprentices would chant these sequences aloud, embedding the rhythm of days into memory, while the priests calculated auspicious times for planting, ceremonies, or political action. A quirky thought drifts in. The Mayans essentially ran a civilization-scale metronome, with the stars, sun, and moon keeping everyone on beat. Fringe scholars propose that some glyph sequences encode long-term planetary events, though historians still debate whether these were predictive tools or symbolic gestures. Moving toward a sunlit terrace, you notice niches aligned with both sacred and solar calendars. You imagine priests placing offerings maize, jade, incense according to Tzolk'in days, lunar phases, and planetary positions. The act itself is choreography, harmonizing human ritual with cosmic cycles. Historians still argue whether the precise alignment of offerings was rigidly codified or adapted flexibly, though the precision suggests both careful observation and practical wisdom. The jungle hums around you, a layered chorus of insects, birds, and distant howls. You crouch to study a stela, recording a king's reign with Tzolk'in and long count dates. The integration of historical record with sacred cycles illustrates a culture deeply attuned to both human and cosmic order. Fringe scholars suggest some inscriptions even anticipate rare celestial events, though historians still debate whether these calculations were practical, symbolic, or performative. A quirky mental image emerges: an apprentice squinting at Venus while balancing a codex on one knee, calculating kaya tones in the humid jungle air. You wander to a shadowed wall where murals depict priests and nobles observing the sky. Lines trace the path of the sun, moon, and Venus, and you imagine meticulous observation, careful notation, and ritualized chanting. Each sequence translates celestial motion into civic and spiritual guidance. Historians still argue whether these observations directly influenced political decisions or primarily informed ritual timing, though their dual function seems clear. You crouch beside a niche marking lunar phases, tracing glyphs for each stage, imagining priests coordinating communal festivals, offerings, and rituals to align with the moon's rhythm. The interplay of Tzolk'in, Hob, long count, and lunar cycles transforms the courtyard into a dynamic calendar, guiding human behavior as much as celestial observation. Fringe scholars suggest the system may also have integrated climate patterns, though historians still debate the literal versus symbolic role of these observations. A bird flits across the mural, its shadow briefly touching a glyph, depicting a deity associated with maize and fertility. You chuckle at the thought that even wildlife participates, unintentionally, in cosmic bookkeeping. You step closer to a carved stela showing overlapping cycles of day signs, lunar phases, and backtons. Each glyph, each dot, each bar represents decades of observation, calculation, and ritual embedding into society. Historians still argue how widely the populace understood these systems, though ritual participation likely ensured a shared sense of time's flow. Sunlight shifts, casting long shadows across niches and terraces. You pause to consider the mental discipline required. Multiple cycles observed, noted, and coordinated simultaneously, turning temporal measurement into a practical and spiritual framework. Fringe scholars speculate that rare celestial events could be anticipated using these methods, though historians still debate the exact techniques and accuracy. You imagine apprentices chanting sequences, the rhythm of their voices echoing across stone, embedding cosmic awareness into daily life. You wander toward a corner terrace where faded pigments suggest ceremonial use. You imagine offerings aligned with sacred days, lunar phases, and planetary cycles, transforming mundane gestures into acts of temporal orchestration. A quirky thought drifts. The Mayans were running a civilization-scale orchestra with stars, stone, and ritual. And you, unwittingly, are tracing the sheet music centuries later. Historians still argue whether such practices were more symbolic than practical, though the integration of observation and action is indisputable. The jungle hum grows softer as afternoon wanes, and you notice a series of carved glyphs showing rare conjunctions or unusual day combinations. Each mark represents observation over decades, careful calculation, and precise ritual timing. You imagine priests reciting sequences, internalizing cycles, and guiding society with gentle authority derived from knowledge of both cosmic and human order. Fringe scholars suggest these sequences may have anticipated eclipses or planetary phenomena, though historians still debate accuracy and method. You step to a shaded niche and trace glyphs of Tzolk'in in day signs paired with lunar phases. Each pairing creates a multi-layered temporal framework guiding agriculture, festival timing, and political action. You imagine apprentices chanting, counting, observing, and learning patterns that span decades or even centuries, internalizing the rhythm of cosmic order. A quirky mental image forms. A trainee nearly falls asleep mid-chant, but is gently nudged awake by a flickering shadow, reminding him that vigilance and devotion are inseparable in this system. Sunlight slants across stelae and niches, illuminating overlapping cycles. You pause, feeling centuries of observation, calculation, and ritual dedication resonate beneath your fingertips. Life, ceremony, agriculture, and politics are synchronized with celestial motion, creating a society profoundly attuned to the cosmos. Historians still argue whether such calendrical knowledge was elite or broadly understood, though ritual practice suggests its influence permeated all levels of society. Finally, as the jungle hum softens with dusk, you lean against the warm stone, breathing deeply. The Mayans' integration of Tzolk'in, Hob, long count, lunar cycles, and planetary observation illustrates a civilization where time is not abstract, but lived, measured, and orchestrated. Each observation, calculation, and ritual embeds human life into cosmic rhythm, leaving behind a legacy of temporal sophistication, patience, and imagination that continues to whisper across the centuries. You wander into a sunlit plaza where the stone beneath your feet carries centuries of shadow and light, and it finally sinks in. The Mayans were not merely timekeepers, they were composers of temporal symphonies weaving daily life, ritual politics, and cosmic observation into a single intricate cadence. Tzolk'in, Hob, long count, lunar phases, and planetary cycles overlapped like threads in an immense living tapestry, guiding human behavior as much as celestial phenomena. You imagine priests pacing terraces, chanting sequences, consulting codices, and observing Venus or the moon, their careful attention blending devotion, calculation, and education. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens understood these systems beyond ritual participation, though the integration of public festivals suggests broad societal engagement. A soft breeze stirs the humid air, carrying the scent of damp stone, earth, and flowering vines. You crouch to trace faint glyphs on a weathered stela, noting interlocking day signs and long count sequences. Imagining apprentices chanting and internalizing cycles that connect individual actions to cosmic rhythm. Each dot, bar, and deity symbol conveys meaning: fertility, war, rain. Harvest linking mundane life to celestial order. A quirky thought drifts into your mind. The Mayans were running civilization as a living clock, and the jungle itself was both gear and conductor. Fringe scholars suggest that some sequences may encode predictions for rare eclipses or planetary events, though historians still debate whether these were literal, symbolic, or both. You step toward a terrace where niches mark ceremonial offerings. You imagine priests placing maize, jade, or incense precisely according to sacred days, lunar cycles, and planetary positions. Each gesture translates abstract time into tangible action, reinforcing cosmic order in human experience. Historians still argue how standardized such practices were, though the alignment of niche, offering, and celestial event suggests deliberate precision. You pause, picturing apprentices carefully noting every shadow, moonrise, and planetary conjunction, learning that observation is both devotion and responsibility. Sunlight glints across murals, depicting priests and rulers observing celestial events. You trace the intricate sequences showing Venus's rise, lunar phases, and Tzolk'in intersections, imagining hours of concentration, chanting, and calculation. The interweaving of ceremonial, agricultural, and political time demonstrates a society profoundly attuned to temporal rhythm. Fringe scholars propose that some murals may encode predictive astronomical calculations, though historians still debate the methods and reliability. A quirky image forms in your mind: an apprentice squinting at Venus, balancing a codex, trying not to tip over while reciting Bactans. You wander to a stone platform where faded glyphs indicate overlapping Tzolk'in, Hob, and long count cycles. Each mark represents meticulous observation and careful record-keeping, tracing centuries of societal memory and celestial awareness. You imagine apprentices memorizing these sequences, internalizing cycles that link personal, civic, and cosmic time. Historians still argue whether long count literacy extended beyond priestly elites, though festival participation and ritual instruction suggest broad engagement. A gentle rustle in the jungle reminds you that even ephemeral events, animal movement, cloud shadows, or sudden breezes interacted with observation, adding unpredictability to structured calculation. Fringe scholars suggest such phenomena may have informed minor calendrical adjustments, though historians still debate whether these observations were symbolic, practical, or ritualistic. You chuckle at the thought. The Mayans accounted for cosmic order, but left room for nature's improvisation. Sunlight shifts as the day wanes, casting long shadows over niches and murals. You crouch beside carvings showing caetans and bactans, tracing the linear and cyclical measures of time. The long count records millennia, while the Tzolk'in and Hob orchestrate daily life, ritual, and governance, a system simultaneously precise, poetic, and practical. A quirky mental note crosses your mind. It's like watching someone use a 1,000-year planner while making coffee. Historians still argue how predictive these calendars truly were, though their societal and ceremonial influence is unquestionable. You move toward a shaded wall where glyphs depicting lunar phases and planetary alignments overlap with Tzolk'in days. Each mark is a node in a vast network of observation, ritual, and governance. You imagine priests chanting sequences nightly, tracking Venus, the moon, and solar cycles, coordinating festivals, agricultural activity, and political events. Fringe scholars propose that rare eclipses or planetary conjunctions were anticipated using such methods, though historians still debate the exact techniques. You pause at niches once holding offerings, picturing the precise placement of maize, jade, and incense according to sacred days and celestial observation. Each act reinforces the intertwining of human action with cosmic rhythm, making time a lived, tactile experience. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, practical, or both, though the integration of observation, ritual, and governance speaks for itself. The jungle hum softens as evening approaches. You reflect on the remarkable sophistication of Mayan timekeeping, Tzolk'in cycles guiding daily and sacred life, Hob solar months coordinating agriculture, long count recording millennia, lunar phases marking festival timing, and planetary observation informing ceremony and prediction. You feel a kinship with priests and apprentices whose devotion, calculation, and ritual transformed time into a living, guiding presence. Finally, as dusk settles over terraces, stelae, and murals, you exhale, inhaling the earthy, humid air. You sense centuries of patient observation, meticulous calculation, and ritual practice embedded in stone and pigment. Life, ceremony, and the cosmos converge in a quiet harmony, a sophisticated legacy of temporal ingenuity that continues to whisper across centuries, inviting you to dwell gently within its rhythm. Now, as the evening settles and the hum of the jungle softens to a gentle whisper, you allow yourself to slow to sink into the rhythm of your own breathing, and to imagine the quiet devotion of those Mayan timekeepers. Their world, measured in Tzolk'in days, Hob months, long count backtones, lunar phases, and the bright path of Venus, unfolds slowly around you, not as an abstract intellectual exercise, but as a living, breathing symphony. You picture the priests and apprentices moving through stone plazas, terraces, and niches, their eyes tracing the sky, their voices counting sacred days, their hands placing offerings with patient precision, connecting human life to the eternal cycles of the cosmos. You notice how each calculation, each sequence of dots and bars, each ritual action is imbued with care and attention. You feel the centuries stretching beneath your fingertips, the hum of life merging with the distant stars, the cadence of counting, and the subtle pulse of earthly time. Even the smallest elements, the shadow of a bird across a mural, the sway of a vine, the scent of damp limestone become part of a vast temporal network, each detail a brushstroke in a canvas that spans generations. As you exhale, you let the complexity of the Mayan calendar and the subtle interplay of human, celestial, and cosmic time dissolve into something gentle, something quietly wondrous. You feel your mind slowing, your heartbeat aligning with the soft rhythm of days, seasons, and celestial cycles. There is no hurry here, only observation, reflection, and the soft, comforting knowledge that humans have long sought to place their fleeting lives within the endless dance of the universe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let yourself drift, carried by centuries of patient observation and the quiet whispers of cosmic rhythm, toward the soft embrace of sleep.